Within a year, all the glory of Kedar will come to an end. Hello, everybody. This is Gilgamesh, and this is part of my ongoing series on the book of Isaiah. We are in chapter 21 now. We're starting in verse 13 and going to the end of the chapter. This section is part of what they call the oracles about the nations. And we've moved along here through, this is our third oracle in this chapter. And this oracle, like others, starts with the Hebrew word masah, which is something that is a burden that is carried. And this is the burdensome message that the prophet has, this time about Arabia. So let's get into it. The oracle concerning Arabia. In the thickets of Arabia, you will lodge caravans of Dedanites. Well, the opening line here about it being an oracle, again, it's a masah. It's about Arabia. That phrase is actually missing from the Septuagint, but it is probably placed here correctly since it's a common element of most of the prophecies in this section. So we're not sure why the Septuagint is missing this. It is possible that it might be a title to the section that was placed at some later point after the texts that were translated into the Septuagint and the text that became our Masoretic text had diverged. That is one explanation there. But this opening preamble here, the oracle against Arabia, is not present in the Septuagint, but we are still clear that we're talking about Arabia from the next line. In the thickets of Arabia, you will lodge caravans of Dedanites. Now, you may be wondering, where are these thickets, these wooded lands that are associated with Arabia? It's not known for its forest land. I am guessing that this is a reference to the various oases that are throughout the desert there, and that they're referring to those as this word here that means a thicket or a forest area, meaning a place where there is some vegetation. That would make more sense with the context here, but these are not heavily wooded areas. In fact, it's a lot of sand and a lot of desert. The Dedanim that we're speaking of here are in a northern region of Hejaz, which doesn't help me much, but I got a map out. And here's where it's at. You can see that they are on the main trade route heading down towards the Yemen area, which is where we believe the country of Sheba is located. There's also this is the frankincense trail, they diverge here, and you can actually go up towards Babylon as well from this trail system. But this main trail here went through Dedan and went into Sheba, which is now where modern day Yemen is, we believe. Dedan is mentioned a few other times in the Hebrew Bible, and often in conjunction with Sheba. And it's actually a really good example of how some of the ancient genealogies that we find in the Hebrew Bible work. For the most part, these genealogies were not about literal family trees, but were intended to give a connection, a brotherhood, a relationship between nations and tribes. These could either be to establish a friendship, a brotherly love kind of situation, a kinship, or they could be to assign blame and thus vengeance of these people are descended from our enemies or are closely related to our enemies. Both ways are seen in the Hebrew Bible. But they would establish these genealogies to help people understand what the relationship of their nation was with these other nations. And so they put them into a family tree of sorts. Dedan has particularly an interesting set of relationships. In Genesis chapter 10, verse 7, and also repeated in 1 Chronicles 1:9, we have Cush has a son named Ra'ama, and that is a name that is also associated with a tribe in this area. And he has two sons that he names Sheba and Dedan, obviously referring to these civilizations. Okay, so these are from the descendants of Cush, who was, of course, the father of Nubia, that we've talked about before, that is currently ruling Egypt. So there's one genealogy. But just a little bit later in Genesis 25:3, and just a few verses later in 1 Chronicles 1:32, we have Abraham's son, Yokshan. by his third wife, Keturah, who has two sons that he names Sheba and Dedan. So there are two genealogies for the ancestors of these nations that contradict. And so they are both from Abraham and from Cush. In Ezekiel chapter 27, verses 20 through 22, we have all these place names that are kind of come together in this little set of verses here. We have Rahama, who was the father of Sheba and Dedan. We have Dedan, and we have Sheba, and we also have Kedar, who we're going to see show up in this chapter in a moment. Then again, in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, we have Dedan and Sheba showing up again. Ezekiel particularly emphasizes that they were trading partners. And that makes sense since they are on a major trade route that goes through this area. So it is fair to ask, what would Isaiah, living in 8th century BCE Jerusalem, what could he have known about these peoples while he was there in his home in Jerusalem? We have no idea how widely traveled Isaiah was, though his writings show a significant understanding of the wider world, and he seems to have moved in court circles, dealing with kings frequently, giving him probably extensive access to information about other nations. But it is sometimes hard for modern people who have grown up with CNN and the BBC to understand how little the common man of the Iron Age knew about their world. No one had yet invented a map, and most people probably never in their whole life went further than maybe 100-mile radius from where they were born. For people in the modern world who often commute 20 to 40 miles a day for employment and use GPS on a regular basis, it can be hard to comprehend what it must have been like to only have a vague understanding of what was over the horizon, how far away the earth actually stretched, and what peoples lived there. But Isaiah seems to have had a great deal of information. He seems to easily name off faraway nations and seems to know something about them and their situation. So either he was widely traveled or he had access to people that were widely traveled. And that would have been a very small percentage of the people, but there are, of course, always been people that go on these trade routes that then bring back stories and news from the wider world. Even if at this time nobody could quite understand where these people were situated or how far away they were, there were still people that made the journey and brought back news from them. So that is an interesting concept here as we look at this chapter. As we move forward, to the thirsty bring water. Inhabitants of the land of Tema, meet the fugitive with bread. This is an interesting injunction to care for war refugees. It's not the first time that Isaiah has done this. Tema is an interesting place here. According to the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, Tema was an oasis town in northern Arabia, situated some 300 kilometers from the coast of the Dead Sea and a good 130 kilometers northeast of Dedan. So that should give us an idea of where it is. It's just to the northeast of Dedan as the crow flies. Jeremiah 25:23 also lists Tema with Dedan, and Job 6:19 lists it with Sheba. So it is tied in with these other tribal peoples here that were major trading partners. So it may be a synonym for the Dedanites. Ezekiel 25:15 assigns the name of Tema to being one of the sons of Ishmael, as does 1 Chronicles 1:30. So it also has figured into these genealogies, although in a slightly different way. It also is a descendant of Abraham, but by his second wife, Hagar, and not by his third wife, Keturah. According to the genealogies, these are all related to Abraham, except for the genealogies that say they're related to Cush. So they're family. But the warning here is to call upon them, and it gets a little confusing here, to identify who exactly are the refugees and who exactly is being asked to help them. it can actually be read either way. It can be read that either the people of Dedan and Tema as being the refugees and asking, won't someone please help them? Or it could be asking Dedan and Tema to please help this displaced people who they're coming across with their caravans. It's also possible to read it as instructions for one to help the other, either Dedan to help Tema or Tema to help Dedan. It's really a little unclear because we're not sure in each of these lines where it talks about the people who are thirsty and then it lists the inhabitants of the land of Tema. It's not certain if the people who are thirsty are being addressed as in a positive phrase here, in other words, a renaming of them by saying the inhabitants of the land of Tema, or if the inhabitants of the land of Tema is a noun of direct address, meaning they're the ones being spoken to. So either it's saying, to the thirsty bring water, you know, the inhabitants of the land of Tema that are over there being thirsty, or it's saying, to the thirsty bring water, O you inhabitants of the land of Tema. Both lines can kind of be read this way, and so it leads to a bit of ambiguity as to if they are the refugees or if they're being asked to help the refugees. So going further, we hope that we can get a little more from the context to solve that, but that is a bit of a problem here that remains a little unclear. But I should note that in these lines, it looks like Dedan and Tema are being put in as poetic parallels, meaning they are probably synonyms for each other. It is speaking of them as one group. But as we move forward here, for before the swords they fled, before the drawn sword, before the bent bow, and before the press of battle. Isaiah is continually concerned over these people who are caught in war. And interestingly enough, as I looked at this, it came to my attention that the verb here that's translated as fled, which is nadad, is actually the same word that was used the previous verse as fugitive, noded, and it is actually the word dedan spelled backwards. Was that intentional? I don't know, but that was an interesting thing that I just kind of stood out to me, that these have the same letters. One is just backwards of the other. It's possible that Isaiah was doing something fun there. These 4 lines, though, in Hebrew, have a very distinct rhythm. With the exception of the introductory preposition for, or ki in Hebrew, each line has exactly 3 words and something of a parallel structure on those words. The first word in each of the 4 lines is the Hebrew word mifneh, meaning from before the face of. And that is on each of these 4 lines. And so they form this bit of a rhythm here, these 3-word long lines. Before the swords fled, before the sword drawn, before the bow bent, before the press battle. There's a definite rhythm and poetry that is intentional here with those lines. So going on to verse 16, for thus my master said to me, within a year, according to the years of a hired worker, all the glory of Kedar will come to an end. Kedar. Kedar is a nomadic tribe in the Syrian Arabian desert, more precisely in the region between Egypt and Dedan, Edom, if that helps you at all. But from what we can see in like Ezekiel 27, verse 21, it might be another name for the Arabian tribes in general. And so the glory of Kedar might be a synonym for the glory of Arabia. For in Ezekiel 27:21, it refers to the Arabians as the princes of Kedar. So this may represent one of their primary tribes, one of their most prominent tribes, maybe a leadership tribe, and therefore a stand-in for the entire civilization itself. But Kedar is mentioned a few other times, even in Isaiah. In Isaiah, in chapters 42, they will be singing for joy, and in chapter 60, they will be part of the procession that comes to the temple in Zion to offer sacrifices in the temple. So despite this verse, where Isaiah says that their glory is going to come to an end, Isaiah does elsewhere prophesy ultimately a glorious future for this people. So this is not entirely a gloom and doom position on them, although it seems that they, the ones of Kedar, are the ones who are engaging in battle and driving these fugitives from their home. And Isaiah is warning that within a year's time, that they will be broken as a military power. The word glory here, kavod, is actually the same word that is translated as press and press of battle in the last verse. You could actually translate that as glory of battle, that they fled from before the glory of battle. Although that sounds a little too nice for what battle is, so they went with press. But the word here, kavod, actually has a sense of heaviness, a weightiness, an overwhelming presence. And when we say this word glory, even when referring to God, it's not quite what we think of as glory, as being radiant light or that sort of thing. It is glory in that it is a heavy weight. It is difficult to be in the presence of. And so this was used for major military power, for the power of God, for anything which is burdensome and difficult to bear. And so, yes, it's saying that the glory of Kedar, the glory of the battle that they have brought, is going to be completed. It's going to come to an end within a year. And so the military oppression will end. And then it goes on further here, and the remainder of the archers, of the mighty men of the sons of Kedar, will be few. For the Lord, God of Israel, has spoken. So a couple of things to point out here. This word mighty men, this is a word that specifically means elite soldiers, ones who are specifically trained in fighting. If you recall, King David had a group of mighty men that followed him around everywhere. This is that same word. This is an elite group of soldiers, particularly trained for battle. And so it has that very specific meaning to it. It's also possible that we've got some sort of a chiasm going on here. It's a little bit of an interesting format, but we have here, before the drawn sword, sword being the first element, before the bent bow, bow being the second element, and before the kavod of battle, the glory of battle. For thus my master said to me, within a year, according to the years of a hired worker, forms sort of a center to the chiasm, although it's kind of on its own a bit. And then we go back to, and the glory of Kedar will come to an end. So we have kavod repeated. And the remainder of the archers, paralleling bow, and then of the mighty men, paralleling sword, of the sons of Kedar will be few. And then we ended off with, for the Lord God of Israel has spoken, which seems to parallel that centerpiece. So it's a little bit of an interesting formation, but it seems intentional to me. This is a fun little prophecy we have here from Isaiah, that he's told this people to care for war refugees and has promised that the opposition will eventually lose their power. It's most interesting since this does not seem to involve Judah or Israel at all. This prophecy seems to refer to some relatively minor regional conflict where Isaiah feels the need to write about it and to address the need of the refugees in this far-off land from him and ask people to help them. I think this tells us a lot about Isaiah. Thank you very much. Please like and subscribe and share this with your friends if you find it interesting. I'd love to see the channel grow. I want to thank everybody that's helped me get to 500 subscribers. That was a nice big milestone that I did not ever expect to hit. I'm happy that there are 500 of you out there that like to listen to me ramble about this stuff. I will continue to make these things, and I'm looking forward to making a few new formats of videos. Maybe you'll like those, but it's exciting to see that there are so many people interested in this. So like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.